When we talked about inflation coming down in October because of energy prices dropping, that was fallacious.
Tell me, Martin, in this autumn statement, did you see much to celebrate at a time of what is still a cost of living squeeze?
Well, look, if we compare it to the situation we were in before the autumn statement, if those changes hadn't happened, there is a giveaway in here, certainly a 2% reduction in national insurance. Is a tax cut for people who work. And it's important to note that's why you do it on national insurance. If you do it on income tax, then you give it to all types of earnings, including unearned income as well. So that will be an improvement. I mean, it doesn't really go close to matching up of the consistent promise of fiscal drag, which, for those who don't know, isn't Jeremy Hunt in Rouge. Fiscal drag is the fact that they've frozen all the tax thresholds. So as incomes rise, because we've got an inflationary period, people are paying more tax. I was pleased, I have to say. There were quite a lot of worries about the state pension and benefits uprating, that they were going to jemmy that by changing the figures of what counts as earnings and by changing the month of inflation. That didn't happen. We got the legitimate expectation people had that the state pension is going up by 8.5% in April, that the benefits, universal credit, are going to go up by 6.7%. We know the minimum wage is going up even more, 9.8%. And I was pleased to see the housing allowance go up. So if you look at this with blinkers on and you forget the frozen tax thresholds, then yes, this is a pretty decent budget. But if you take those blinkers off, ultimately, we are all continuing to pay more on the back of inflation and wage increases that mean the tax thresholds eat away. And a really interesting thought for you, if we continue the pension triple lock in the way it is right now, and we say that the state pension is going to rise 5% a year for the next 2 years, if you've got a frozen tax threshold, in 2 years' time, someone who only has the basic state pension as their income will have to pay tax on it.
Yes. So
that's the bizarreness of the way we're setting the system.
And that is the reality for many people, I suppose. The more and more people, millions of people, still being dragged into tax and into the higher rates of taxation, still paying the highest rate of burden of tax that we've seen for 70 years. And I guess against that, you could argue that the tax cuts today are a bit like getting half an aspirin when you've got a blinding headache.
Again, this all depends on how you look at the system, doesn't it? It depends whether you have the blinkers on and say, if no changes have been made, are we better off? Yes, than if no changes had been made. But are we better off in the totality of what's going on with the government's management of the economy and how it chooses to tax? Well, clearly not, because the biggest thing that he's done is frozen tax thresholds to 2018, and that is a massive, massive impact on people's pockets.
Right. What would you have liked to have seen in this autumn statement, Martin, bearing in mind the risk of if there's too much by way of giveaways, you end up putting up inflation, putting up interest rates, which means bigger mortgages, takes away all the benefit and makes things tougher still?
I'm going to deliberately obfuscate on your answer, but declare I'm doing so in a nice, transparent way. I try and steer clear of party politics, as you know. So it is not for me to talk about tax and spend policies. But my big disappointment was the thing that I have been campaigning on, and that I'm absolutely shocked the Chancellor just didn't take the easy win that I was giving him on, which is about the lifetime ISA. Now, we'd had a lot of talk. You'll know this. There was a lot of the supposition before we went into the budget that there would be stuff in here for first-time buyers, and there'd be stuff because they wanted to boost that. There's nothing. There's no changes to first-time buyers. Now, in some ways, that in itself isn't a bad thing, because when you try and pump money into the housing market, you tend to boost house prices, and it's inflationary and it's self-defeating. But the campaign I've had is the lifetime ISA is a product people aged 18 to 39 can open. And when they open it, they get a 25% boost from the state on their money towards their first-time deposit. So you save £1,000, you get 1,250. The problem is there is a cap that says you can only use it on a property worth less than 450 grand. And that cap hasn't moved since 2017, even though house prices have gone up by over 30% in total in that time. And 26 of the 32 London boroughs, the average first-time buyer's property is over 450,000, and other places in the southeast and other urban areas. Now, this is the thing that people don't get. So you get a 25% boost if you use it, but if you take the money out to use for another reason, including buying a property, which is what you were saving in it for the first place, that's above the threshold, you get a 25% penalty. That does not leave you where you started. It actually means, I'll just do the math for you because it makes it a lot easier. You save the max for 4 years. You've got £20,000. You get a £5,000 bonus from the government. You've got £25,000. You then take it out for buying a house that is above the 450. You pay a 25% penalty. You get back 18,750. You put in 20 grand. You pay a fine to the government of 1,250 quid. So we've effectively had mis-selling by the state, encouraging people to save for their first-time property in these lifetime ISAs. House prices have gone up, the thresholds haven't kept up, and we're now fining these young people, actually fining them. The state, Jeremy Hunt's Treasury, is taking revenue from these people when they go and try and buy their first-time property. And I've been saying, well, listen, just change the rule. You actually do it by doing a 20% penalty, but ignore that. Change the rules so you say people don't get the bonus if they take the money out to buy a house over the threshold, but they don't pay a penalty either. And it's things like that people find so frustrating and so disappointing, that this sensible, easy changes which have a negligible impact on the economy are not made in budgets. And I know many people in the ISA world and the pensions world are upset about small tweaks that could have been made to make things better. Instead, what we do is we pull big rabbits out of the hat, whereas actually just a few small pellets, not sure that analogy works, but we'll go with it, a few small pellets would have been really helpful to lots of people and probably wouldn't have cost very much.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got a way of affecting the Treasury's thinking, Martin, so who knows, maybe by the time of the next budget, they'll be taking that aboard as well. I mean, look, the final thought, and I know you don't want to do politics, so I'm not going to ask you to, but an economist at the Bank of England not so long ago suggested that we'd all have to get used to being poorer. And when you look at the economic outlook, you listen to the Chancellor, you listen to the shadow Chancellor, it seems as if he was right.
I think he's half right. I think what we've had ever since the pandemic is a polarized nation. And it's why when I put a message about how people are struggling, I often get on social media, no one's struggling, queues at airports are bigger than ever for holidays, and people are buying more cars. We have a split nation. And it started in the pandemic when you had one group of people tending to be low incomes or on benefits who were really struggling. And many of those on low incomes were the ones who were actually going out to work and taking the risk and going into different places. And then you had another group of people who weren't spending any money and were still on full salaries, working from home with no costs, or they were on furlough. Yeah. And what we had is that divide grew. And many people got a lot poorer, including the excluded. And at the same time, £170 billion of extra savings were built up. Now, we still have that divide between those who have the savings and those who don't. Those who have the savings, yes, the cost of living crisis means they may have been spending their savings. And hey, I'm one of the very affluent. I put myself in that category. But we've also got a lot of very poor people. And inflation tends to be regressive. The less income you have, the more of your disposable income you have to spend on things where prices are going up. So I think, yes, we all have to get used to being poorer. But when we actually look at it, what we've got is a much more split society, which is why the thing that wasn't mentioned in the Chancellor's statement that we'll all be talking about tomorrow, well, I certainly will, it's my whole day's booked out to do it already, is tomorrow morning they're going to announce a 5% rise in the energy price cap from January. Energy prices going up 5% in January. In fact, not to take too much time, but A, that's not factored into the current inflation figures, and B, when we talked about inflation coming down in October because of energy prices dropping, that was fallacious.
Yes.
Because this time last year, everyone was getting £66, £67 taken off their bills by the government energy support. But because that is seen as an income transfer from government, it does not count in the inflation figures. So while people are paying the same in practical terms, once you factor that in for energy this year as they did last year, because energy rates have come down this year, but we don't get the subsidy, in the inflation figures, it looks like energy prices have dropped. That's not the reality.